Well, hello and welcome to Sports by Compion Sports Studs Edition. My name, of course, is your host, Stephen Compion. Today, we will be talking about the mighty, the powerful Ozzie Newsome, nicknamed the Wizard of Oz, if you will. One of the very first and most powerful tight ends the NFL had come across. An Alabama native, an Alabama Crimson Tide legend, and named perhaps the best tight end to come through Alabama, which is really saying something for such an historic college. Today, we'll be discussing his stats, his NFL career, his college career, and his ongoing professional vice president career with the Baltimore Ravens, where he is still listed as their vice president of operations. So this man is an absolute NFL legend and, of course, a Hall of Famer. So today we will be going through his stats, what he does for this league, and what he still continues to do. So without further ado, let's hop right into that. As we see, we pulled this right up from the NFL Hall of Fame website. Career receptions, 662 receptions. Consecutive games with a reception, 150. Now that is a lot of games to consecutively be receiving, getting the catch, especially in the earlier times when he was playing during the late 70s all the way up to 1990, where they just weren't throwing the ball as much. So it's pretty crazy that this man was able to pull off the stats he has at 7,980 yards receiving. Fell just short of 8,000 yards overall. He played 13 seasons with 47 touchdowns. He just doesn't like dropping the ball, this guy, apparently, and he wouldn't play as long as he did if he was, dropping a lot of balls. So he's kind of a perfectionist, as you'll see from a lot of these guys who make it to the Hall of Fame. Got to be quite a perfectionist to be able to do these things. Through 13 seasons, as we mentioned before, he was nicknamed the Wizard of Oz. His college coach, Mr. Paul Bryant himself, the legend in his own right, was the one who named him the greatest tight end in Alabama history, which included Don Hodson. So, yeah, this is quite a stud. He played all 4 years for the Crimson Tide, won a total of 42-6 overall while he was there, had 2,700 yards there in college, 16 reception touchdown passes. And the crazy part about this is that he was a punt returner for the Crimson Tide, which is pretty wild as a tight end to be being a punt returner, and he even averaged 20.3 yards per reception in the Southeastern Conference, which was quite a record for over 20 years before, some of these more passing happy teams have since broken that record. He was named All SEC player both in 1976 as well as 1977. The lineman of the year from the Birmingham Quarterback Club, which is kind of weird that the Quarterback Club is naming lineman of the years, but nonetheless, Mr. Ozzie Newsome himself did, in fact, win that. He was selected first overall by the Cleveland Browns. As you can see, in 1978, I believe he was 23rd overall. And yes, he did have quite a prosperous career with the Cleveland Browns. As we mentioned, his many games in a row with a consecutive catch, had 589 yards to begin his career, which quickly put him as the first rookie ever in Browns history in 25 years to be named Browns Offensive Player of the Year in 1978. All-Pro honors in his second season in 1979, and again in 1984. He is a player who played in 3 different decades, including the late 70s and, as I mentioned, all the way up to 1990. So longevity was a huge part of this man's career. His leadership was a huge part of this career, as he was an outstanding citizen as well. If they had the Walter Payton the Year Award back then, he probably would have won it many years in a row because he was a man of the community. And, yeah, long-term Browns offensive captain. He played in 198 consecutive games, which is tough back then when it didn't have as much treatment, enough things to kind of keep you on the football field. So it's very impressive that he was able to do this. In addition, just a lot of really great stats from this guy. But the reason we wanted to cover him is we haven't covered a sports tight end yet. And so that's why we're hopping into this episode, kind of getting you guys the lay of the land. He had 2 different years over 1,000 yards in 1981, as well as in 1983. As with most players, he did sort of fall off towards the end of his career. You could see a couple of seasons of 300, and 240 to end out his career, 412, towards the late 80s. These things happen as players get older and play for longer, but it's still massively impressive that he played all these games. And then you could see most seasons he played all 16 games. Pretty impressive. Only 1 year in 82 where he played not under double-digit games. So that's pretty incredible. He did go to 3 different AFC championships in the 80s, late 80s, pretty much 3 years in a row, actually, against the Denver Broncos. Kind of crazy that in 2 of these games he did not record a catch. Whoever the quarterback was, it seems like you may want to throw it to the guy who had consecutively been catching you balls, consecutively been an offensive leader for you. Very strange. And in the middle game, he caught only 3 passes for 35 yards. Wonder why they lost these games. Typical Browns stuff, if you ask me. Sorry, Browns fans, but it's true. But yes, he had a lot of great things in his career. All-Pro in 2 different years. All-Team second time All-Pro about 6 of these years, it appears, which is absolutely bonkers. And went to a couple Pro Bowls. Obviously should have been to more, but the Pro Bowl was apparently a joke even back then. Who knew? But yes, he holds all kinds of team records. He holds the most receptions in a career, most receptions in a season, most receptions in a game when he went off for 191 yards against the New York Jets back in 1984, which is just a pretty incredible stat. And that record actually held for 25 years before Josh Gordon broke it, of course, against the Jacksonville Jaguars' infamous over 235-yard receiving day. Was finally what broke that record for the Browns. But before that, Ozzie Newsome was holding that record for what seemed like it was going to be a very long time, possibly forever. And so he has been just an absolute cornerstone for the Cleveland Browns. He eventually retired after those 13 years. Probably got a little tired of, never winning the big games. That can definitely wear on a guy. As we mentioned, 23 overall. He grew up in Alabama, got to play for the Crimson Tide, and led them to much glory as well, which is very impressive. He stayed in town, wanted to be probably always wanted to be a Crimson Tide guy. So it's very cool that he stayed there. Some of the other things, I just think it's dope that he was, of course, Wizard of Oz. That's a pretty cool nickname to have. Obviously the movie was very popular back then. It still is now. People still reference it all the time. So yeah. But what's maybe even cooler, and what maybe a lot of people know him as now, is the executive vice president role that he has with the Baltimore Ravens. He did hold a GM role for them as well. From when did he do that? Right here, general manager from 2002 to 2018. So he had a lot to do with drafting. I think he was the one who drafted Lamar Jackson. No, was he? Yeah, maybe. So yeah, he has been with the Baltimore Ravens since he retired, pretty much. He was a director of personnel at first, then went to executive vice president, general manager for them, and then went back to executive vice president as the assistant general manager took over for him at the time. And overall, I just think that's really crazy because there's not a lot of NFL players who have the smarts to go from playing on the field to having a very, impactful role with another team after that, and also a division rival to the Cleveland Browns. So he gets to smash his old team all the time. So pretty cool that he, was able to make that transition and still continues to be a huge part of the NFL, still continues to be a huge part of the Baltimore Ravens' success. He won his first Super Bowl back when they beat the New York Giants, got his second one when they beat the San Francisco 49ers. So ended up getting himself 2 Super Bowl rings, even if he wasn't on the field for when this happened. Still had a big part to do with it, maybe even a bigger part, because he drafted a lot of the guys who made that all happen for them. Big part of those defenses that were amazing for many years. There's countless great players that have come through the Baltimore Ravens, and as a personnel guy, he was a big part of why they ended up drafting those guys. But yeah, an absolute legend, very large gentleman as well. Not like a lot to say about this guy because he did play before my time, of course, but I did want to open up our coverage of tight ends with Mr. Ozzie Newsome himself. Just a two-time Super Bowl champion, as I mentioned. A real one of the very first tight ends to start making a huge impact on the game. It's crazy to me that he was returning punts for the Crimson Tide. Like, that's not something you see a lot as a tight end. But yeah, as his coach said about him, a total team player, fine blocker, outstanding leader, great receiver with coordination, speed, and hands. My man didn't like to drop a lot of balls. He was quite the perfectionist, as he said. He was actually a Cleveland Browns scout for a while and was the assistant head coach, offensive personnel guy for the Cleveland Browns for a while, director of pro personnel, but then they let him go after the 95 season, and I bet they regret that, as he went on to do great things for the Baltimore Ravens. As we already mentioned, a lot of his great things. One of the inductees of the 1999 NFL Hall of Fame class. Shout out Mr. Ozzie Newsome. What an impressive NFL life. They should do one of those NFL life stories about him, because this is a man who still continues to impact the game. Impacted it back then, still impacting it now by giving players their chance. Really impressive, really cool to see. Shout out Ozzie Newsome. Shout out Sports by Compion. We're out of here.